Versus nature.
To the Sacred Earth podcast series. Sacred Earth Trust is a Delhi based NGO working on conservation of sacred groves, habitat restoration, and creating awareness around eco spirituality. So, today we have with us Ajay Rastogi and Jason Brown taking us on a journey on how to experience God in nature. Let's dive straight into our podcast. Welcome, everybody. Jason, Ajay, Rubina. I'm so very happy to have a very first podcast here for Sacred Earth Trust, and the topic being experiencing God in nature. And Jason and Ajay both are not only advisors to the Sacred Earth Trust, but they're people I admire personally very much. And there's a lot that I've learned from them. Sometimes without them realizing that I'm picking up things, and just things that inspire me about them. And so I'd like to hand over first to Ajay, and Ajay could probably tell us a little bit about himself, and we could just start like that.
Thank you, Radhika. And I like the enthusiasm that you always have. And I'm very optimistic about the Sacred Earth Trust and its activities. It's very timely that it's there. And now for about me, in the sense that I worked with organic sector and natural resource management and biodiversity conservation for a large part of my life. And having realized that what we really need is transformation in people and not more projects. So since last 12 years, we are working with the youth in trying to transform their feelings towards environment, connectedness with natural world and with themselves. And you know that every journey starts with the self. So it's the self transformation first. So I think so it's a kind of an evolutionary journey for all of us in the sense of the youth that we work with, and me too. Yeah.
Right, that's so true. And yes, it's my realization too that I think enough of us focusing only on the symptoms and rather look at the root cause of what's causing ecological destruction. And not just that, like the wars and the greed, everything that we see is pointing towards something deeply wrong with our way of thinking, our way of understanding and relating with reality as we see it. Great. So, Jason, would you like to go next and tell us more about you?
Sure. I don't know how much background you'd like, but just in terms of really basic introductions, I grew up in California, in Southern California, and it's a very commercialized sort of consumerist society down there, and I always felt that there was something a bit wrong with that. But I was raised in a Mormon household. So Mormonism is an American sect of Christianity. And in my university years, had something of a crisis of faith and left that church or that tradition. And I found a lot of refuge in the forests of Utah where I was living. I had moved to Utah to do university. And I found a lot of refuge in the trees and the mountains there. And I really wasn't sure kind of what path I wanted to take, though I know I wanted to do something connected to trees and forests and to spirituality. Because I had considered atheism for about maybe 5 minutes. I tried that on and it did not sit well with me. And so I knew I was in some kind of spiritual seeking mode, but I also really love ideas and reading and writing. And so I did work in forestry and then ended up in a PhD program at the University of British Columbia, which is where I live now, here in Vancouver in British Columbia, in the rainforest, as we were talking about. And I started a project which is very much a personal project called Holyscapes, so holy landscapes or placescapes. And it's really just a way for me to reflect on the intersection between the inner landscape and the physical or ecological landscape. And so I don't feel like I have any kind of world-saving diagnosis. I don't know what to do next, right? I think we're living in times that are quite mysterious and dark. And I think talking with folks like you really gives me hope about what we could do next, And so when I started teaching courses on religion and ecology, I was kind of blown away by the diversity of sacred forests in India. And I think maybe that's how you and I connected, Radhika, was on this topic of the beauty and diversity of sacred forests in India. And yeah, so a lot of common ground between us, I think. Questions of inner landscape, outer landscape, sustainable food systems, forestry. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Thanks, Jason. I remember the first time that we actually interacted was I saw you'd put up a course on the inner landscapes and relating it to the desert landscapes in terms of spiritual ecology. And I took that course of yours online, and that's how we got talking.
The desert workshop I usually hold during Lent, so Christians are about to start Lent right now. And so it's kind of a desert. It's in terms of spiritual ecology, it's kind of a desert season. And so I kind of talk about this idea of desert spirituality for the rainforest. But yeah, I didn't realize that's how we connected. So very cool.
Yeah, and it was really fascinating because purely, because it was the first time ever that I came across somebody who spoke this language and who thought these thoughts, because maybe I hadn't spent so much time exploring more, on who's out there talking about these things as much as I should have. And you were the very first, academician and thinker who's, reaching out to people and putting this knowledge out there. So it was kind of a turning point for me, whether you realize it or not. And so I'm curious, like you explained that you had this journey, and from growing up in a completely different environment, a completely different landscape, both internally and externally, probably, I'm guessing at that point. And just the whole journey of yours, how does it define, what eco-spirituality means for you? This whole journey, I know that it's something that keeps changing as it deepens over time. And it would be interesting for everybody to know what it really means for you. I think it's a very personal thing.
Yeah, I feel very daunted by that question. It's a great question, right? And I think it's one you should bring to all of your conversation partners. This is a great series. So first of all, I like to say it as ecological spirituality. Sometimes I find that term eco gets thrown around a lot, and we talk about we could even talk about eco-capitalism or something, so I really like to say the whole word ecological spirituality, right? Or ecological humanities. And that's just a personal preference, obviously. But for me, for going back to our example of the desert, right? So if you walked into a Lenten retreat in a Catholic church this year during Lent, someone might say, oh, Lent is like a desert time, but you don't need to go to the desert. You know, you can just read these readings or think these thoughts. And I think for me, my first impression of that question is that ecological spirituality is a spirituality that's grounded in the particular places that we find ourselves. So for example, when I go for a walk in Pacific Spirit Park, which is a rainforest that has been cut over by early 19th century European settlers and converted into a park. At first, I'm tempted to feel like I'm in a place called nature with a capital N, right? Nature. So it's this place that we've kind of roped off from the city, and it's the opposite of the city, right? It's the not city, right? It's the green space. But if you dig a little deeper into history, you realize that this place was embedded and still is embedded in the religion and cosmology of indigenous peoples. So the forest is not just a culturally neutral space, right? That's like, oh, I can go here and feel warm and fuzzy inside. It's a political ecology too, right? It has a history of colonization and thousands of years of history in indigenous food systems and religious and spiritual practice. So ecological spirituality, to me, is understanding that. And that's a lifelong project, right? It's a lifelong project. What are the layers of human suffering and human art and human religion and spirituality and connection and food systems that emerge from a particular place? And then how can connecting with those places tap us into something beyond the place itself, right? So the particular place is connected or hitched, as John Muir liked to say. It's hitched to everything else in the universe, right? So we find our particular places to be gateways to the transcendent, to the universal. And so for me, an ecological spirituality, right, is really getting to know a place and all its beauty and messy history, and then spending time in that place so that you really get to know the seasons and the cycles of the place. And then the place acts as a means of facilitating connecting with something deeper, more transcendent, the divine. Yeah, and for me, right, rooted in the Catholic tradition these days, and I say that very broadly, right, the small c Catholic tradition, that I'm not uncomfortable using the word God, right? So I would say ecological spirituality is about finding God in the natural world. Some people might not be comfortable with God language, and that's fine, but for me, it works very well. And I'll stop there because I could just keep going and going and going. And maybe you want to circle back and ask questions like, what are you even talking about when you say this?
Yeah, no, we get it. We kind of fall into that trap as well. And I think that's really beautiful how you put it, like the layers of culture and the people and nature and spirituality, how they all come together and then helps you tap into something beyond just the physical. I think that's so true. Like, you put them in words, we've felt that, especially like Rubina, and I'm so sorry. I should have introduced Rubina before. I just assumed we all know each other, but
Yeah.
maybe we just take a pause here, and Rubina can introduce herself, and or maybe we can do an introduction in the end, and we can add that
Yeah,
to
yeah,
the
yeah.
beginning.
We'll do that later. Let's continue.
Yeah. Great. But Rubina, I'm just going to do a short one. That Rubina has been working with the Sacred Earth Trust for the both of you, and she's really good. She's a really good friend of mine, and we do yoga together. And she's just finished her master's. She stopped her batch, and in wildlife sciences, and she's really good. And we've just both been kind of on the same
Wavelength of-
wavelength. We just understand you know this connection that we both exploring deeper and deeper in ourselves also. So it's really beautiful. So yeah, so that's Rubina, and then she can introduce herself so we can record it.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
So yeah, so that's really beautiful, Jason. Thank you. And I'm definitely going to be thinking more on those lines going forward, not just with the places that I've grown to love, landscapes. And we were discussing recently about a magic forest, we call it the magic forest, the very first sacred grove that we set up. And I was telling Rubina, or maybe it was another friend of mine, that whatever you give to the land, like, with that land, we spend time cleaning it, we grow trees there, we protect it. The land gives you so much more back, and it's given us healing. I don't think anybody can deny being healed, just being there in that land. And that land has given us opportunities and experiences, and which are priceless, truly priceless. So it's so true. I never had really explored my relationship with landscapes before. And so Ajay, coming to you, and I mean, you had such an interesting journey. I'd spent about 3 to 4 days with you at your center in the Himalayas at Rikshale, and we spoke about your journey to an extent, like you working with WWF, and then finally deciding, taking a calling to move to the hills, and opening this opening the Center for Nature Contemplation, and working with kids, working with people to bring them to that place of connecting deeper with nature. But personally, for you also, it will be really interesting for us to know what is it, um, how is it that eco spirituality translates for you?
Yeah, thank you, Radhika. And I think what Professor Jason said resonates and echoes quite a bit in terms of eco spirituality. And my thing is that, see, what I have felt is that we have almost forgetting that we are a biological organism. Means there is so much of intellectual growth and cognitive ways of being, that the whole expression of that I'm a part of this natural whole, the wholeness, and my entity is in oneness with the natural world, is getting lost. So while we can look at it, we look at the natural world, in a very analytical way, or observe it, or understand it, or even for that matter, anthropological studies, it still remains as if we have a little bit of a distance from what is being studied. So there are two things, one is a subject, and then there is a person or the human species which is trying to understand the natural world. And I think this is what, if when we work with the eco spirituality realm, when I mean that the reconnection with our biological and agricultural roots, that we were sustained by the natural world. For thousands of years, we were sustained by the natural world. We didn't have the wherewithal to be able to create that distance that we have created now. So for me, the eco-spirituality means that we come in terms with what other species are, and we as a biological organism start to feel how natural world is for us. So we are, let's say, if you are a wildlifer, then it's not just in habitat for others, even it's in habitat for me too. So as a biological organism. And so how much I need to exert myself on that habitat so that the habitat sustains and I also sustain. Now, I think for that matter, when we look at it, it is the landscapes that have been shaped, by human interventions traditionally. Now, I live in the mountains. We see all those terraces, which the slopes at some point of time have been carved, if I can use that word, because it is almost like a craft. If you look at the whole hillside, and then if you look at how finely the terraces have been carved out of that land to produce food, I think then it's a different way of looking at it, as per when we start to say agricultural economy, for that matter, and then it is a different way of looking at it. So for me, instead of looking at the agricultural economy per se, we are looking at the local food systems, and that's what the agriculture is. So that is how it is with everything, what I mean by eco-spirituality. So suppose we were looking at water, let's say. So then the water is also sacred in that sense. And therefore, there is a whole lot of festivities, traditions. It's like a celebration. And I think for me, eco-spirituality is also about celebrating life, and celebrating life, not just for human species per se, but also for everyone else, including me, in the natural world as a biological organism. So I think it is this spirit and the connection which I feel is the essence of eco-spirituality.
That's really beautiful, and it reminds me of, remember when I was there at your center a few months ago, and then there was this time when we were doing yoga outside the, by the Buddha statue, and there was, there was this time when we were just lying down in shavasana, and then these beautiful clouds were passing by, and we had this music on, and for me, the way the clouds moved in that moment, and then how the light fell through them, and it was just, I don't know, it was as if God was speaking to me, like through that. And it was like as if that I'm always here. It's just that you have never, taken the time to notice me, but I'm here for you. And it was really beautiful. And then the whole way back, I was just on this euphoric trip all the way back, down the bus when you dropped me at the bus stop. So, I mean, that just came to my mind. But yeah, I mean, what you said, celebrating life for everyone, just the inherent value in it, and just, how it expresses itself in so many forms, and how everything's interrelated. Now, I just want to put forth that the communication can be between you and Jason as well. Let it not just be me and Rubina asking you questions. Of course, you can, it's a four-way conversation. So wherever you feel, any of you feel like you want to add on to something, or something else arises your mind, you can feel free to go that.
Also, just to inform, we are in the last 5 minutes of this meeting. So I think this is a good time where we can just join back, like end this meeting and join again, so that we have full 40 minutes again.
Okay,
Like,
fine.
yeah, the meeting will end in, so like before we take on the next question, we'll just quickly join back.
Does it take 5 minutes?
Yeah, we have last
Right.
5 minutes are left. So I'll just
Okay, so we'll
stop the meeting. Yeah, stop the
The question is about, you talking more about your experiences in nature and how they shaped your journey into eco-spirituality. For me, like, it was a process. Like, I was working for conservation for 13 years, and I looked at it as like, yeah, something that needs to be protected. but it wasn't, and I felt deep emotions to see anything wrong happen to nature. You know, any destruction of nature caused me pain and anger. But then it wasn't until I think it deepened recently, like especially when I was just going through a really tough time in life. It was, I think, a little over 2 or 3 years ago. And so I seek refuge in nature. And the more I did that, the more I felt held like very lovingly with nature. And I felt these energies coming towards me, which were full of love. And I was just amazed that this is even possible. Like what I'm feeling is even, does anybody else feel it? Am I imagining it? But then the more I gave in and surrendered to it, the stronger I became, and I knew that this was real. And but yeah, I mean that's part of what my journey has been. And again, as I said before, it's very personal, and I think it life takes you on so many journeys, and you know, for people like you and us, we've realized that nature is one of the biggest teachers, right? So what has your journey been like with that, and your journey into eco spirituality? What events or what specific experiences deepened your relationship spiritually? Any one of you can go first. Yes.
AJ, you want to start this time or you want me to go?
As you say, means should I?
Okay.
So I think it was soon after I graduated. I studied agriculture, and then I studied environmental science, and as you mentioned, WWF. So with WWF, I started to work in Arunachal Pradesh. And there I happened to visit a community, and I was seeing what kind of agriculture they were raising rice. And I was looking at that lady who was working in the rice fields, and she was selectively removing some plants. Now, in the scientific way of understanding a rice field, all plants other than the rice should be taken away, and they are considered as weeds. But when I was looking carefully at this lady, she was only removing a few things. And even within those few things, she was leaving certain age groups behind. So I asked her, there is such a big field, if you will spend so much time in looking at each plant and removing it carefully in terms of which one do you want to remove and not, will it be possible? And then why not just remove everything? Because that's how I was educated in the university. And she said that no, it's not true, because there are a lot of these plants. Some are attracting as an alternate host to many of the insects that want to eat rice. So if I keep them, then they will be more attracted to these plants rather than the rice. And some are digging deeper, some are plowing for me. So some are digging deeper into the earth and making the nutrients available. And the aeration is better. And then she said some are so the electricity has gone. Now the real video will happen. What do we do? Should we ask Jason to, or is it okay this way?
Yeah, it's okay.
So then she explained to me almost like 6-7 uses of those plants, including on some that the birds will come and be attracted to feed the berries, and then there will be some who will, and then they will also see the worms. So some birds will come to feed on the worms. And she was not just growing rice, she was also cultivating fishes, in the same pond. And the and ducks in the same pond, rice field. And then she explained to me, when the ducks go around, that creates a movement in the water. And there, with that movement, some of the insects that are trying to pile on the rice blades, the green grass, they fall off into the water, and the ducks eat them, and then the fishes eat them. Means it was such an intricate understanding of how nature functions and how she is facilitating it, and she is being facilitated at the same time because she is growing rice. So I felt at a loss that it is for such a complex affair. In the university education, we were educated that, okay, it's such a simple thing, just eradicate everything else and leave rice behind. So I think that was my first eye opener into this whole worldviews of how harmoniously human beings and nature can co-inhabit this planet, and not just co-inhabit, but grow and evolve, because we have grown and evolved together to some extent. So I think from then on, when I started to see, because my eyes were opened by her, then I started to see, because everywhere there is spirituality happening, and the people have reconnections with the earth, they rejuvenate, they celebrate. And so I think I would say that that has been the journey. And then the second aspect of it is that it is not just the functional ecosystem and our survival that is dependent on this understanding, but it goes deeper than that. What it goes deeper is that when we have such a deep connection, and when we work with our hands and feet with the earth, then it rejuvenates our soul. Means, if I may say, Rabindranath Tagore's very famous poem, he said that the water just doesn't cleanse our limbs, it cleanses my soul. So I think that's the kind of connection that we can develop with the natural world and be rejuvenated by it.
That's so beautiful. And it reminds me of the time we went to the waterfall and with our feet in the water. It was really beautiful. So Jason, would you like to share more on your experiences in nature that shaped your journey towards eco-spirituality?
Yeah, I'm just very impressed by that very paradigm shifting experience that you had, AJ, with that, that duck pond. Very cool. For me, I guess it started with a couple of encounters with non-human persons. So I was doing an anthropology study in Guatemala during my university degree. And I was on a coffee farm from one of the mentors' family owns a coffee farm, and they had a small menagerie, like a little zoo, and they had a deer in there because they found the deer on their property, and they basically thought that it was in more danger being out in the wild, because if anyone saw it, they would hunt it and kill it. And so they brought it into this little menagerie. So it was a little sad that it was enclosed, but I guess it was safe there as well. But I walked in there, and because it was just behind a little enclosure, I just sort of leaned in like this and looked at the deer, and the deer did the same thing. The deer leaned into kind of check me out too. And so it had this little wet nose, and it was kind of sniffing. And there was just a moment of complete, wonder at this other person, right? It wasn't just a natural object. It wasn't wildlife. It was a person. And so that encounter really shifted something inside of me. towards this idea of the world being alive. The world is completely alive. And, I had kind of shifted towards a vegetarian diet. I wanted to live more ethically, but I had never had such a strong kind of personal experience with another being. And so that was a very powerful experience, that moment. And then, the more I did graduate school and was kind of working my way out of the religion of my childhood, the shift from imagining God as like a static entity or even an anthropomorphic being in the sky to this idea that God is a process, is a kind of evolving, emerging process. That really was a paradigm shift for me. And so rather than being in a forest and seeing things as like, the creation, this indirect connection to God, right? God made things or like set things into motion. God is alive or at work or even becoming within the natural world. So I know that's a bit abstract and a little academic, but it really had an impact on my journey, right? To start seeing the natural world not as an indirect effect of a transcendent being, but as the breath or the even the body of God, of the divine. And so I would say those were two of the most kind of powerful, either experiences or paradigm shifts for me. And then, all of the innumerable small moments, right? Like Radhika, you talked about the clouds at the yoga center, right? There's so many moments like that where it's just moments of quiet and stillness that really shift things or help you feel connected.
That's so beautiful. I was getting goosebumps. I know what you're talking about. Like, how, recently for me, it's also something I do intention. Sometimes I'm intention. I read something and I think that, yes, this is, I know that this is the next step forward for me to explore. Maybe, and there is an idea put out there, like for a while now, I really want to experience interconnectedness, like how everything is one, right? And I guess everybody does, or maybe many, many millions and millions of people do. But yeah, I have that yearning. And then there have been moments that I've shared. I was telling Rubina the other day that I was in the hills and in Himachal Pradesh, and there was this moment when all these deodars kind of just, it was night and it was moonlit, and there were huge deodar trees all around. And then suddenly those deodar trees just kind of became more alive than they ever felt. Like, and they were all individual, and suddenly, like, as if there was a force inside all of them. And it's hard for me to explain, but it was just like this field of energy coming alive around me through those trees. And it was so beautiful that I felt like I had to just maybe hold one and just be with this moment. But then I couldn't, because there was a friend of mine with me, and I just couldn't break that conversation and do this. But I regret it so much. But yeah, and even my time spent with trying to communicate with plants and opening up to that, that's kind of also, okay, I should stop talking about what I feel. This is about you. But
No, I
okay,
think that's also important in a way to
Yeah.
take the conversation forward. And while you guys were talking about your experiences, I felt like between the four of us, at least we have all these experiences. Like when you said about seeing that deer and experiencing more than more than just seeing an animal, seeing beyond it. And I think I also have had experiences like this. And feeling something bigger than yourselves. Like since I've been small, I think wind is one thing that has really made me feel connected to, like how Jason said, to God. And whenever, like, a breeze blows my way and I can feel it, it just fills me with so much, like, which is very difficult to explain. And I think I did experience something like this just today morning, and I was feeling so dull and tired, and I was like, no, I'm going to stay in bed and just stay put. And I opened my window, and then there was this beautiful breeze, and the sky and everything just looked so energizing. Like, I can't explain, like, in 5 seconds I felt completely different than how I was feeling just a moment ago. And I said, no, I will go do yoga, even though I was feeling very, very tired, just 5 seconds. And I guess those experiences really awaken something in us, in me. And another experience that um, I felt was, similar to something that happened like while we were doing yoga in our sacred grove. And I was just walking, and I was walking bare feet, and there was this cobra and a snake which I've never seen up close before. And in that moment, I didn't feel fear. I did not feel scared at all. And the snake acknowledged me, and I acknowledged it, and that was it. We had a moment, and then he went on his way, and I was just awestruck. So I guess these are things that are common between all of us. So, Radhika, do you want to ask the next question? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So the next question basically, we've been covering a few of that in our outreach programs that we're doing for children about, expressions of spirituality, eco spirituality across different cultures around the world. And there's such a rich, um, deep, ancient history, across the world, across continents, rooted in nature worship. And like in India, we have sacred groves and we have rituals associated with those groves. We have tree worship, we worship mountains and rivers and animals, monkeys, snakes, elephants. Um, it would be really interesting for the viewers. Every time we do this, people are really like awestruck because they haven't really, many people haven't experienced it, or they haven't, maybe just heard of a few cases, but haven't really thought of it as a cultural, phenomena or cultural um, expression for people, or a system of belief for people. So I'm sure you have very interesting case studies that you've come across or you feel like people should know about. So Jason, would you like to share a few? I know you have so many from the desert.
So there's just so many things that you can talk about, right? But what specifically you're saying case studies? Can you just repeat the question?
Yeah, like say in South America, they have these huge ceremonies for sun worship, right? Or in like in India, we have it's more Nepal now, where we worship Mount Kailash. Or recently, I went to a state in North India where they worship this mountain, Govardhan hill, and they all, do this. They circle around the mountain, and they believe that this is a sacred mountain. Um, yeah, or like in Kerala here, a southern Indian state, they have temples dedicated to ants, to the ant spirit, and where they feed ants, so, because they believe then they'll have a more, they'll have a better um, produce, from the fields. So, I mean, just examples of culturally based eco-spiritual practices.
Hmm. God, yeah. I mean, there's just. I think this is a great area for exploration, documentation, right? All the different ways that food systems and forestry systems and cosmologies, can teach us about these things. So, for example, one of the case studies that I use a lot in my classes to talk about sense of place is a book by Keith Basso named Wisdom Sits in Places. And it's an ethnography of the Western Apache and how they have come to kind of how the kind of sense of place that they've developed in their home, their traditional territory. And basically the idea is that many indigenous people's place names are quite descriptive, right? The place names are just a few phrases like, you know, a clump of cottonwood scattered here and there, for example. That would be a place name, right? So cottonwood trees scattered here and there. But the place itself develops a really rich kind of storied history. So layers of stories. So a sacred place can accumulate stories. And so, everyone who's watching this and us together, I'm sure you can think of places in your house or in your city that when you walk by it, you can't help but think of a memory or a story, right? So places can accumulate memories. And so for a people that's lived in a place for thousands of years, those stories start to accumulate. And so the Western Apache have accumulated all of these stories in their various places, but those places serve as a kind of what we call like a moral landscape. And so, for example, in a conversation, you may, if you wanted to teach someone a lesson, or if you wanted to correct them, or you're talking to a teenager or a child, you wouldn't tell the whole story associated with the place. You would just say the place name, and the person would automatically connect that to the story and the lesson.
Hello, everybody. It is really nice to be part of something like this and hearing you people talk about your connection with eco-spirituality. Like Radhika said, like, I don't think I've met a lot of people who have views like this.
Case of the cottonwood trees, there's a story of a woman who went to visit her daughter-in-law too soon after the marriage, right? So this mother-in-law went and visited the daughter-in-law too soon after the marriage, and there ended up being a Pima raid on the village, and she was killed in the raid. And so if you wanted to suggest to someone that they were being a little too nosy, or they were maybe not minding their own business, you wouldn't say mind your own business. You'd say, you'd say the place name, cottonwood trees scattered here and there. And so Keith Basso has kind of documented all of these really interesting case studies, and it really just shows how deeply connected the Western Apache are to the place. And I don't say that to make it sound very romantic, like they have this unique relationship to place, even though they have a really cool, deep relationship. But all of us have those memories attached to places, and in some ways, places, like we've already said, places teach us things, right? So we learn from the landscape. The places teach us. In some cases, for indigenous people, they would say the places teach them the names of the place. So there's all kinds of cool examples like that. Or, for example, Australian indigenous peoples, in their initiation ceremonies, Australian peoples receive a few lines from a song that is believed to have been spoken by the totems at the creation, at the dream time, right? So the Australian peoples emerged from the earth, the ancestors of Aboriginal peoples emerged from the earth, and then those totems shaped the landscape, right? So all of the different animals that make up the landscape in Australia are the ancestors of the various indigenous peoples. And when they emerged from the landscape, they sang these songs, and so they have what's called song. And so Australia is crisscrossed with all of these different song lines that people have learned through the generations that are attached to particular places. And so some people, some very talented song men can listen to the song, the tempo, the melody of the song. And because it has like certain flat notes or really stochastic notes, they can actually calculate where that song line may have happened just based on listening to the melody and rhythm of the song. Right. So it's a very interesting spiritual ecology that Australian indigenous people have cultivated.
Wow, that's amazing. I had no idea about that these things existed. I just like a new world opened up to me. That's amazing. Ajay, what about you? Would you like to share some experiences? I mean, certain practices that you know exist and that have fascinated you personally?
Yeah, means this experience from Australian Aboriginal people is so fascinating in the sense that I also hadn't heard of it before. So what I'm going to say that, see, we have also kind of within the framework of, you can say, biocultural heritage, in the sense that the biology and the culture of the place co-evolves. And for that, we have tried to understand in it from a more kind of an international network of friends who live and work with indigenous peoples. And we are working in the with the Lepcha and the Limbu communities in the North Bengal area. And what we have learned from them is that there are these three operating principles in terms of our relationship with the natural world. And what we have translated them in our language. But, and for that, it's like principles of equilibrium is there. So when we say equilibrium, it is not just between human beings. It is that what actions we do, which keeps the earth also in equilibrium, the place, the space in equilibrium. So for example, now the fishing. Now fishing can be done in several ways. When we saw there is that they are still fishing with bamboo, sharpened bamboo ends. And just in a Himalayan river, you make a little bund and then you go and try and fish in the season that one should fish. It's not in the spawning time and all that is anyway, they respect. And then we were wondering that, okay, so much of effort and physical effort and, and so much of risk. So this is like an equilibrium, because if you use something which is very potent, and if we use a chemical or if we use a weapon, then it's not equilibrium. Then it's aggression, it's violence. And I felt so enamored by that whole thought process. And before the fishing started in the season, every year, there is a puja, there is a worship which happens on the bank. And the priest comes and then the priest offers prayers to the river, and then only it will begin. So it is such a way of expressing the equilibrium. The same thing is also in terms of reciprocity, So whatever we harvest, let us say, from the forest, then when the season comes, then the plantation is done again. And that's what is reciprocity. Whereas we feel that reciprocity is only between human beings, but that's between human beings and the natural world. And so is the expression of solidarity in the sense of, okay, like an steward, not really an steward, but nature is also an steward. but expressing solidarity with where we can repair and rejuvenate the natural world, facilitate. If a landslide has happened, what can we do to repair it so that the scar is not so much worsened? It's a natural process. So I think those principles are universal to that extent. And that's what my learning has been, that this is the way we correlate with the culturally and functionally with the landscape that we inhabit. And this is a very, and that's how, these landscapes have supported biodiversity and been sustainable for thousands of years because of these values in place.
Wow, that's fascinating. I had never, now it's making me realize like there's so many layers to our thoughts as well, and our ability to look at things, like perhaps I would see, these principles in action of, solidarity or equilibrium, but I probably wouldn't recognize them for exactly that, but you see it. And I guess that's why it's so important to share and to exchange our perceptions and our experiences, because it opens up whole new worlds of, for us to be able to look at things in different ways. So it's beautiful, like whatever, I mean, what Jason shared as well. I mean, that's insanely mind blowing. It's
Yeah.
beautiful. Thank you so much. I love those.
It has been lovely hearing these experiences that you have shared with us about how people in different cultures have these different aspects of eco spirituality interwoven with their practices, how they deal with things. Now, for our listeners, we would like if you can share some practical ways in which they also can experience the divine in nature, the divinity that exists in nature, and also how we have spoken about eco spirituality and how it is something that each of us has experienced in its own right. But how can we revive that eco spirituality? Maybe Ajay can start with the with answering this question.
Yeah. Thank you, Rubina. I think it's a on an experiential domain. You see, the thing is that the practical ways to experience divinity is on a very much of an inner realm of oneself and an experiential way of being. It will be very hard to kind of put a measure to it or to be able to prove something in a very systematic way, like we set a proper scientific experimentation of this is the hypothesis, then this is the steps, and this is the result. So what I am intending now with this brief context setting is to explain that we need to transcend this barrier of like that I'm the container, that okay, it's me, my space. Now, if I can somehow transcend this barrier to be able to feel oneness with the natural world, I think then there is some beginning of feeling. Now, how do you do that? It could be done in several ways, and that's the suggestion from me to the listeners. One is that let's just take the example of the breath. So what we are all breathing is a common pool of air. I feel that it's my breath. You feel that it's your breath, but it's just a common pool of air. It's all together. And so is with the forest. The air that is there is the breath of the forest. In fact, That's the breath that we use. And we kind of, if that breath was not there, it would have been harder, much harder for us. So this is something which is oneness already established. It is not that I can deny. Now, if we extend it further, then it is means that oneness can be seen, like, okay, whatever we are eating, let's say, okay, when I eat a fruit, for example. Now, if I were to really think of it, that what I am eating is a product of the oneness of the natural world, it is very easy for me to understand and feel the divinity. Now, how does the fruit has come about? Okay, means the natural forces have worked on it. My ancestors who have died, and then the trees who have died, they have added the minerals to the soil that is being uptaken by the plant to grow. Then the flowers are coming, and then thanks to the sun, then the flowers are coming, and then the pollinators are coming, and then the pollinators are living somewhere. They are also, it's not that they are eating on it, means they are also they need a more diverse habitat than just the flowers alone. And then they so the flowers, and then there is some fruit is coming along, and the fruit is the response of the tree to be protecting and nourishing its seed. And that's how we are sharing it from the tree. And so it is that oneness which is already established, in the sense that, and so much of perfection is happening there. Means I was told that by the large cardamom that we all like, by a scientist, that it is the 6 visits of a pollinator that makes the large cardamom really nice in quality and fragrant. Now you can imagine that how much of a divinity is there. Who is actually calculating that? Okay, we are observing as scientists, we have come to learn of it. But how does the bee know that, okay, I have to make so many visits, and has it fulfilled or not? Means, so there is so much of it everywhere. If we start to look at it, that oneness, I think, is the medium, and that can only be experienced. And once we open ourselves, transcend, that what I mean by transcendence is the transcend this very narrow way of looking at the way we have been taught to look at things, and just be. And if we just be and see, then I think there is a lot to see in the terms of divinity in the natural world. So that's what I think I would like to mention to the viewers and the listeners.
Thank you, Ajay. Like, I felt very connected to what you said, like the experiential aspect of having to observe divinity in nature. And I also believe that, like you said, once you see it, there is no looking back. I think once you experience that in something very small, then it's everywhere. Then your whole worldview changes. And I think that is beautiful. Thank you for sharing with us. Now over to Jason. Can you share something for our listeners and viewers as well?
First, I just wanted to amplify everything AJ said, because as I was thinking about the answer, I was like, oh yeah, breath. Oh yeah, food. I just wanted to say amen to that. That's where we can all start, right? Is with our breath and with the food that we eat. And then for me, I would also say, even if you live in a city, you can just stepping right outside your door, you're connected to the season and the time of day, right? Those are spaces within which to experience the divine. The cycle of the moon at night, and if you can see any stars, even I know our cities are quite make it a little challenging, but there's still stars. And I always find, even in my inner city night sky, I'm still able to see Orion and Sirius, the part of the Canis Major constellation. They're very prominent right now in the northern hemisphere in the winter sky. And so that, to me, every night I try to at least connect with that for a moment, right? So the night sky, the time of day, food, breath. But I would also say that folks should or could try to connect with the religion of their culture or their heritage, not even necessarily as a means of devotion or as a orthodoxy, but there have been thousands of generations before us who have lived in this world and who have written beautiful things about our connection to place. And so every tradition has a richness of poetry and theology that I would encourage people to connect with, right? I mean, just in my kind of interfaith studies, because I teach a religious studies class, I'm always impressed with the poetry of the Sufis. I love the verses of the Bhagavad Gita that talk about the transcendent aspects of Krishna. I love the Tao Te Ching in the Taoist tradition and its kind of mysterious language. I love the poetry of the Chan and Taoist poets from the Chinese hermits. They have some wonderful poetry about nature. Mining is a terrible metaphor, but mining our traditions for the beauty in the poetry, right, and the theology that connects us to the world, right? So, and I think, I mean, we're sitting on a mountain of riches, spiritually and theologically, whether it's the contemplative Catholic tradition or the Hindu mystics or the Sufi mystics or the Taoists or indigenous traditions and their animist practices, right? There's so much there. But I think, for example, I think Christians have become too obsessed with the Bible and the text itself, and they don't realize that the Bible is very much a book about the outdoors. So much of the stories that take place in the Bible are outdoors, out in the world, in the desert, in the mountains. And, for Christians, Jesus of Nazareth is a person who goes out into the desert before he starts his mission. So there's all kinds of very beautiful examples of the personalities and prophets and mystics and saints that we can follow. And so I would encourage people to rediscover a lot of that, but not at the expense of the things that Ajay is talking about, right? Our breath, our experience, our food systems, and the places that we live. It's not an either or. And in terms of, action, like what can we do? I think that's also not an either or kind of question, right? It's like sometimes we're like, well, we need to transform ourselves rather than transform the world. But, as Ajay said earlier, those two things go hand in hand, right? Self-transformation is part of the bigger, broader transformation. And so I don't have a political platform. Like I said at the beginning, I'm still really confused and uncertain about how to proceed politically. But I think that we need a kind of a top-down strategy and a bottom-up strategy, a strategy that comes from within and one that looks without, right? So it's kind of what we'd call it like an all hands on deck kind of strategy. But we're not going to fix the problems of the planet with just a narrow focus on technology or just a narrow focus on policy. We really have to be thinking about what kinds of people we want to be, what kind of communities we want to live in, and what kind of ethical moral relationship we want to have to the rest of the world, right? Not just about human rights, but about rights of persons and the broader biosphere as a whole. So these are all questions that intersect with our personal lives, our spiritual lives, our community lives, our national politics, and our international civilization.
Thank you, Jason, for also amplifying on what Ajay said and bringing in more things, and especially about how most of us who are living in cities and we feel like we cannot really experience nature, or we can't really, be separated from the city, and we don't have a lot of green space around us. But I think it's everywhere around us. One of my experiences that I had was after yoga. I was just lying down on the mat, and I observed this one tiny blade of grass with one dewdrop, and I felt it was the most beautiful thing I have seen. And just as I kept looking at it, I saw that all of the blades of grass around it had
Mm.
dewdrops. And I had never I saw it, but I didn't really see it. Like, I was blind to all that beauty till I observed that one dewdrop on that one blade of grass. And I just felt like lucky to have witnessed such beauty, right? Like, just lying down in a park in the middle of the city. So I feel like there's something for each of us, and maybe it will be different for every person. Like, some might find it, how you said, in the scriptures, or under the religion that they follow, or their culture, and it can be very subjective. But thank you for opening up various different avenues that we and our listeners can actually explore on their own. And I hope we all get a more deeper understanding of what it means to be part of something bigger than ourselves. And I guess that's how we will be able to move past just not at a policy level, or at making change in one single place or in ourselves. And like you said, both of them will go hand in hand. So thank you so much. And I think with this, Radhika, do you have anything more to add? We can wrap up.
Yeah, we can wrap up, but I mean, this has opened up my mind
Yeah.
to so many things, and I'm so thankful, like, not just for you bringing, the time in to do this, but for sharing, like, such things which are close to you. I know that sometimes I feel, these things are so personal and so dear to me that sometimes I'm not sure if I want to share it, because if it's going to be understood by the other person, right?
Yeah.
So you're making yourself vulnerable when you talk about things which are so um, subjective to you and may not be understood. So I'm so grateful, but I feel like this is something so important, and for this knowledge to go out into the world. And I look at both, and I mean, I look at all three of you as my teachers. And so thank you so much. And I love all of you. And I will see you again soon. Hopefully, Jason, when you're here um, in India, you've been saying that for a while, and we could actually make that happen, like at Ajay's, place up in Ranikhet, Machkali.
Sacred Earth Summit. That's what we got.
Lovely.
I think
Beautiful.
it's been a very enriching experience. Like, apart from this being for the viewers, I personally love hearing everything that you had to share. And yeah, like Radhika said, I think my mind is open wide right now, and I feel very grateful for this experience. And yeah, I thank you on behalf of everybody who's going to benefit from this, and also on behalf of Sacred Earth Trust for taking your time and doing this, managing time zones and platform issues and everything. So yeah, it's been amazing. Thank you.